Good morning or good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Cisco Support Community webinar. We're glad to have you with us. A few housekeeping notes to begin. As you entered the WebEx console, you either joined us by audio broadcast or by phone, which was automatically muted. Because of our large audience in attendance today, you will remain muted throughout the event. When you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the WebEx Q&A panel as you think of them. You can find the Q&A panel in the bottom right-hand corner of the console. Please leave the WebEx chat window for communication to our WebEx facilitator for any technical problems or issues you may be experiencing today. We would appreciate your input regarding today's webcast. A short survey will appear when you close your browser at the end of the event. This time I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, Dan Gerson. Dan?
Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome to the Cisco Support Community. Today we present a live Cisco Support Community Expert Series Webcast. Our topic today, configuring and troubleshooting secure socket layer VPN. My name is Dan Gerson and I'll be moderating today's event. Our expert joining me today is Jazib Frahim. Jazib is a technical leader in the security services practice of Cisco's Advanced Services. He's responsible for guiding customers in the design and implementation of their networks with a focus in network security. He was previously a technical leader for Cisco's TAC security team, leading engineers in resolving complicated security and VPN technologies. He has presented in many industry events, including the Cisco Support Community and Cisco Live on many occasions. He's also written a number of technical documents and books, including Cisco ASA, All-in-One Firewall, IPS, Anti-X, and VPN Adaptive Security Appliance, Cisco Network Admission Control, Volume 2, and Cisco SSL VPN Solutions. Jazib holds CCIE number 5459 in Routing and Switching and Security, a bachelor's degree in Computer Engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology, and a Master's of Business Administration from North Carolina State University. So, well-versed. Welcome, Jazib. Our expert panelists today are Omar Santos and Larry Eddy. They will help in answering some of your technical questions during today's event. Now I'd like to briefly outline the format for today's Expert Series webcast. Our expert will start with a presentation on SSL VPN for the first hour of the program. We'll then dive into the live question submission from the audience for the remainder of the event. Now, during our live presentation, you may submit your technical questions to be answered by our presenter and the expert panelists using the Q&A box on the right side of the console. Now, our team of technical experts is well versed in SSL VPN, so please begin posting your questions now to give us the best chance of answering them. And if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please do post those questions into the chat and we can help you out. Now, we'll be asking some polling questions during today's webcast, and we definitely want you to participate, and we encourage you to answer those. As always, you can download a copy of today's presentation using the link in the chat window. So just have a look in the chat for that link to download that PDF. And as just a reminder, as a bonus today, everyone who joins today's webcast will receive 125 Cisco Preferred Access Points. So be on the lookout for an email during the week after the event for that. Now, let's start things off with our first polling question for the audience. What is your primary role or function in the company that you work for? Is it A, Network Security Engineer, B, Systems Administrator, C, Network or IT Manager, D, IT Executive, or E, Other? Go ahead and take a moment to answer the polling question on the right side of your window, and we'll see those results in just a minute. Okay. And as always, you can submit your questions any time during the webcast. So please don't hesitate, don't be shy, and get those questions in, and it'll give us the best chance of getting to those. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Jazib to begin his presentation. Jazib?
Thanks, Dan. And welcome, audience, for this webinar and webcast series. My name is Jazib Frahim. As Dan, we briefly went through my introduction. If you have any questions, I know you cannot ask those questions live, but please feel free to ask questions in in the Q&A panel, and I'll certainly try to address those questions. As you can see, today's topic is configuring and troubleshooting SSL VPN. To be honest with you, it's a very big topic. We're not going to be able to go through all the possible configuration scenarios or all the troubleshooting scenarios. We present something like this in Cisco Live and some of the other conferences, and it literally takes almost a day, actually, sometimes more than a day, to go through most of the configuration options and go through most of the troubleshooting options. So, it's a condensed version of, what we typically talk about in some of the other industry conferences. So today's agenda, I'll briefly go through the SSL VPN, what it is, and what are the different components in Cisco solution. I'll focus a bit more on the clientless SSL VPN and, go through configuration options, troubleshooting, a few advanced options within that we see a lot of customers using. And then I'll also try to cover or do a demo of some of the things that I'm presenting in today's topic. And after that, I'll do some of the slides for AnyConnect, go through the troubleshooting options for AnyConnect SSL VPN, and then go through the demo towards the end. So that's the agenda for the day. So what is SSL VPN? It's a tunneling mechanism that pretty much a lot of vendors use to encapsulate traffic securely and send it over the internet or some cloud to whatever head-end device you have. So in Cisco's world, we have three different mechanisms, three different offerings around SSL VPN. The first one is called clientless SSL VPN. The second one is called thin client-based SSL VPN, and the third one is called the client-based SSL VPN. These are you'll see these different options in Cisco documentation. However, the first two options, from my perspective, are kind of grouped together because you're not going to be able to use thin clients without using clientless option. So for our perspective, the first two options, clientless and thin client, are kind of bundled together to offer the broader clientless SSL VPN option. And then the other one is client-based SSL VPN. I'll spend a minute on each option, what it is and how it differs, what are the benefits, and what are some of the restrictions within each option. So in clientless SSL VPN option, right, it's great if all you want to do is provide access to certain applications on the other side of the VPN head. And for example, if you have contractors coming in and all they want to access is maybe certain web pages, perhaps they want to launch a remote desktop or something similar to that. They may not need full access to your network infrastructure. And they might be coming in from any device that they carry, right? You don't provide corporate-owned devices to them. So clientless option works great for those type of users. Again, they don't, from a benefit perspective, they can bring any device, they can launch a web browser, authenticate their credentials. After that, they can access whatever applications or whatever options they're supposed to be accessing. Certain restrictions within clientless is, for web or certain application that requires Java or ActiveX type encoding. So when the ASA is rewriting the content, if the content is embedded within certain other applications, you're not going to be able to rewrite those things. So certain websites may not work, again, if they heavily rely on Java or they leverage a lot on ActiveX applets. So in certain options or certain cases, that option may not fully work. To address that, you can use the thin client option within the clientless option. The thin client is for certain TCP-based applications. If something is not working, if the web pages are not properly rendering, you can tunnel that traffic within two options that we offer. One is over port forwarding, and the other one is over smart tunnels. We prefer smart tunnels over port forwarding because, again, I don't want to go into a lot of details in this call, but port forwarding had a number of issues. You had to manually define the mappings, and you had to launch Java as a part of that to be able to then redirect the traffic. Smart tunnel is a lot more efficient and valuable in terms of tunneling the traffic within WinSock. From a benefit perspective, again, the users or the SSL VPN people, they don't have to launch any client. They can simply launch the browser, and again, if thin client options are configured, they can access their TCP-based applications over it. From a restriction perspective, again, I mentioned a few times, it only works on TCP-based application, doesn't work for UDP applications. And smart tunnels, for example, is only supported on Windows and Mac platform. Doesn't work on Linux if you're using that as your main operating system. Clientless access, if you want to provide IPsec type, remote access-based IPsec type connectivity that Cisco traditionally had, where once people are authenticated and are connected from their VPN client, they get full access to the network. Again, that they become part of the network as if they were directly connected to it. You're not really filtering anything, or you're not really dropping anything, unless you really want to, unless you want to define ACLs, or unless you want to define certain policies where the ASA can restrict their traffic. But in general, by default, it doesn't block anything. Again, these were some of the benefits. The only biggest thing is that you then have to install the client to the end device. So either you can do that over what we call web deployment. That means once they are authenticated, they go to a web page, they put in their credentials. Once they're authenticated, the ASA is pushing the client back to the user, and they can install it. Or you have to prepackage it and then use some software distribution mechanism to distribute the client on their end devices. So at a high level, these were the three different options. So in the second poll question is, what SSL solutions do you use or planning on using in your infrastructure? Option A is clientless SSL VPN on ASA, AnyConnect, or client-based SSL VPN on ASA, or you're using both clientless or AnyConnect based SSL VPN on your ASA. Or in certain cases, I have seen customers even running SSL VPN on iOS-based routers. So are you doing that? Or other, if you're using maybe some other products or vendors, you can select that category. So you can select your answer now. And while you're doing that, I'll keep on moving. So before I get into the troubleshooting aspect, I wanted to quickly show you how you can configure it, and then how, based on that configuration, we can look at some of the troubleshooting options. So, like I said, we are condensing a day-long, presentation into 1 hour. So I'll probably go through the configuration options using the ASDM wizards that we have. I'm not going to be able to manually or customize a lot of options using the wizard, but that's okay. We just want to show how it's configured at a high level. So if you want to configure SSL VPN, clientless SSL VPN, launch the wizard, select the clientless SSL VPN option, click Next. After that, it prompts you for the connection profile name. You have to assign it a name that you can then reference to other places. So in this case, you can see that I'm using a name called My Clientless VPN, and you are terminating your SSL VPN connections on the outside interface of this ASA. If you are using certificates, and we highly recommend that you use certificates from trusted root, then you can certainly install the certificate before you configure the SSL VPN option, and then select that certificate to be used for authentication, for tunnel authentication purposes. And then a group policy or group name that you can reference, and then have a specific URL to be pointed to the users when they connect. Once you specify the basic tunnel parameters, the next thing is you have to authenticate users, right? So what authentication mechanism are you going to use? We highly recommend that you use an external database such as Active Directory or Radius, or you can even leverage the local database on the ASA. So in this case, you can see that they have Radius option enabled, or at least defined but not used, but they're using local database. However, in the ASA, we do support a number of external databases, Radius, TechX, Active Directory, Kerberos, or SDI, for example. After that, it's up to you whether you want to define a specific group policy, which we recommend you do, because you can specify whatever parameters or whatever options as a part of that group policy that you can then map to the connection profile. And since we are configuring clientless SSL VPN, if you want to define any specific bookmarks, shortcuts that people can use once they're authenticated, and be able to go to maybe internal websites, or perhaps go to Windows shares, or perhaps launch remote desktop connection. You can certainly define those bookmarks here. And as you can see, I've showed a lot of these configurations through ASDM, and the reason is ASDM, at least for the SSL VPN configuration, is a lot more easier compared to using the CLI. CLI, from a SSL VPN perspective, is very convoluted. So that's why I've showed a lot of these configurations through ASDM. Plus, some of the advanced features of ASA's SSL VPN can only be done through ASDM. For example, if you are defining DAP policies, or if you're defining CSD or host-can type policies, they're all stored in XML that you can't really modify or edit or even define from the CLI. So you really have to use a GUI platform such as ASDM to define or edit or configure those policies. So now that we have a basic clientless SSL VPN tunnel configured, what are some of the things you can do to troubleshoot? Like I said, we can spend hours and hours in showing the different troubleshooting scenarios, but what I wanted to highlight in this presentation are some of the most commonly, troubleshooting techniques or issues that customers run into that we can then leverage to troubleshoot. So the biggest issue we see is authentication problem, right? People are trying to connect, but they're not able to authenticate, or they were able to authenticate in the past, but now they're not able to authenticate anymore. Something happened on the infrastructure, and now people are not able to authenticate anymore. So from an authentication perspective, right, let's look at what a good authentication would look like if we enable debug WebVPN 255. So if you're running into SSL VPN issues, regardless of whether it's clientless or AnyConnect based, I would start off with this debug first, just to see what is the issue. So in the good debug, you can see that everything was hunky-dory. AAA status was accept and user was authenticated. But if you are having certain issues and people are not able to connect, and when they call you and say, hey, my VPN session is not up, or I'm not able to connect, what are you going to do? You're probably going to enable some debugs to see what's happening. So I'll start off with this debug first to see where I'm seeing the error. And if you can see that in this case, I'm seeing an error around AAA status equals error. All it's saying is, hey, I'm doing some authentication and I'm getting an error. What is that error? So now you have narrowed it down to at least that authentication part of this problem, right? So what can you do to to troubleshoot further, you probably want to enable some debugs around authentication. So if you're using Radius, for example, you can enable Radius debug Radius to then see what is the communication between the ASA and the Radius server. If you enable this debug and users are still not able to connect, you can see that the ASA is sending out an authentication request, has user credentials, but server response timeout is the error message that you're seeing. Well, what it means is, for whatever reason, your Radius server is not responding back. Chance that if that's the case, all your users are going to be experiencing this outage where they're not going to be able to connect at all. And so you might be getting a lot of phone calls or a lot of trouble tickets in probably this case. But at least you're able to isolate, or you're able to determine what exactly the problem is. So the previous debug was just one example, right, if you're using Radius. But what if you're using Active Directory as your authentication mechanism? So you can certainly enable debug anti-domain. And similarly, you'll get a message that authentication server not responding in case there is a communication problem between the ASA and the authentication server. Another useful utility that you can use out of ASA is if for some reason your user is saying, hey, I'm not able to authenticate or I'm not able to connect, you can, from the ASA, use the test utility option. And it's defined wherever you define your Radius server, select the Radius server and then click on test. You can select whether you want to test the authentication option or the authorization option. So if you feel that the problem could be on the authentication side, select the authentication option and then specify maybe your own credentials to see if your credentials are fine and maybe the problem is on the other side of the tunnel from the user end perspective. So here in this case, since the problem was on the ASA not being able to communicate with the Radius server, you're getting the same message that the authentication server is not responding, no error. And from the CLI perspective, you can also do the same thing if you don't want to use ASTM. Again, depending on what external database you're using, if you're using SDI, then chances are you're going to enable debug SDI. Or LDAP if you're using the LDAP server. One other useful debug, again, from an authentication perspective, is debug AAA common. Very useful, again, if you're troubleshooting the authentication type issues. Depending on what type of issue you're running into, for example, let's say your users are authenticated, but they're having issues they're having issues accessing maybe perhaps Windows shares or accessing, Citrix type, applications. So the good thing is on the ASA, we have very specific debugs for each type of issue. So if you're running into, CIFS or Windows share type issues, debug WebVPN CIFS. If you're having issues regarding Citrix, debug WebVPN Citrix. So depending on what type of issue you're seeing, I would say start off with debug WebVPN 255 first. See how you can narrow it down from there, and then perhaps enable more specific debugs after that to then be able to see what's happening. Even though I don't expect a lot of people to use CLI from a monitoring perspective, but you can still use some useful show commands. Show VPN session DB is one command that can provide you kind of a summary of your VPN utilization on the box. Not just limited to SSL VPN, but if you're terminating IPsec connections or even site-to-site type connections, it can still show you, the number of sessions, the number of active sessions, or the peak it has seen, or what is the current load. And so a good statistical command if you want to just look at the overall utilization of your VPN usage. And if you want to get more specifics around a particular type of connection, you can certainly type show WebVPN, and then, for example, if you want to know more about the AnyConnect or client-based sessions, you can do AnyConnect, and it will give you more details around the AnyConnect sessions. One of the most important debugging option for clientless connections is using the capture command for WebVPN. And what it is, as I mentioned, when the clientless connections are terminated on the ASA and the end users are trying to access websites or web-based data, you may run into Java type issues or content not able to getting properly rendered type of issues. So you really want to capture, what you are seeing on the encrypted side and what you are seeing on the clear text side. So you can then compare. You can use the capture command using the type WebVPN to capture all the traffic coming in from a particular user, perhaps going to a particular website, particular page that they're not able to properly see. And then once you enable the capture, you can then view it afterwards to see how exactly the page is being rendered. Again, if you're embedding a lot of applets within that, chances are the ASA is not going to be able to rewrite the content within the applets, and that might be the issue. Some customers run into bookmark type issues, right? They have defined the bookmarks, but they are not working properly. The capture command may help from that perspective as well. But some of the other troubleshooting things you can do is, again, you can try to determine if the user is having issues with all websites or just one or two particular websites. Even if it's not just websites, are they having problems with Windows shares that are defined as bookmarks or RDP type sessions? So try to understand what exactly the problem is. If the connectivity issue is limited to one server, try to see whether one user is having problem accessing that server or all users are having problems accessing that web server. In most cases, using smart tunnels, it fixes the problem. So you can encapsulate even your web traffic within smart tunnels, and then be defined over bookmarks. So in most cases, it fixes it. But if it doesn't, then see if you're using some advanced options such as CSD or DAP, because CSD or DAP may also block certain type of accesses. So make sure that you're not using those options. And if you are using it, just try to disable it for testing purposes, just to make sure that they are not interfering with the browsing option. In some cases, the problem may be specific to a web browser. So try to see if you can change the web browser depending on the security settings of a web browser, right? So if you're using IE and has very specific policies and may not allow you to download applet or may not allow you to do something, so you may try to change your browser and see if Firefox or Chrome or something else fixes the problem. If it doesn't solve the problem, from testing purposes, try to see if AnyConnect works, so that you can then see if the backend websites are at least properly working. Again, assuming that it's not working for a whole bunch of users and there is something specific to the website. So that was for clientless SSL VPN. We see a lot of customers using DAP. It stands for Dynamic Access Policy. So I wanted to cover a few slides on DAP. DAP is a dynamic way of authorizing users and then assigning specific policies on those users. So, if let's say you don't want to use DAP and you want to specify policies based on the AD group membership, right? So if you have an AD hierarchy set up where you have full-time users, you have part-time users, you have contractors, you have guests, you have vendors coming in, and you want to specify specific policies or maybe specific bookmarks or specific options to those users. The one option is you may just define different connection profiles, different tunnel groups, and then allow those users to then just connect to those specific URLs based on their role in the organization or based on their AD hierarchy. But that may not scale very well depending on how many policies or how many type of policies you want to define, right? I've seen some customers having 100 to 200 different type of roles. So that type of configuration may become very complex, very convoluted. So how can you address that in a more organized or structured way? So in DAP is something that can help you from that perspective. So DAP grants access based on a particular session to a specific user that you're authenticating, right? So if you have two users, for example, full-time user and a contractor, they can both access the same URL. They can both, specify their own credentials. But when the ASA is looking them up in the AD structure, ASA can say, "Yep, you belong to the full-time employees group, so I'll apply these type of policies to your session." And contractor, you're not a full-time employee, so based on the configured DAP policies, I'll restrict your access to, maybe clientless option with these bookmarks and these type of web ACLs. So I'm not going to let you do much. DAP policies can be defined from a AAA perspective, right? So like I mentioned, you can look at AD attributes, or you can look at radius attributes, or you can look at local attributes, right? Are the users, getting connected to one specific connection profile or something else? Or you can even look at the endpoint attributes, right? You can see what is the endpoint posture, right? Are they running a specific antivirus version, or are they do they have specific registry key that determines whether they are using corporate-owned device or not? So it can look at the AAA attributes or the endpoint attributes, and then define a policy that you're a full-time employee and you're using a corporate-owned device. That's why your access supposed to be this. Or no, you're a full-time employee, but I don't see a specific registry key that tells me whether you are using a corporate device. So I'll assuming that you're using your own personal device. So based on that, you'll get this specific policy and these restrictions. So from a AAA perspective, you can see that you can use a number of local attributes from the ASA, right? So you can match a user to a specific tunnel group, or if you're specifying, or if you know the IP address of the end device that's getting, you can use that, or you can say that this username is supposed to get this policy and user 2 is supposed to get a different policy, or any attributes from LDAP or the radius server. So how do you define a DAP policy? You go to this link for defining DAP policy. It's configuration, remote access, VPN, network client access if you're defining it for AnyConnect, or clientless access for clientless policies, and then dynamic access policy. Define a name, and we'll go through that in a demo in a minute. Define whatever attributes you want to make. Define any endpoint attribute that you want to check, whether antivirus, or in this case, they're doing a registry check. And then after that, it's up to you to how you want to restrict the policy, right? So in this case, you can see that we are restricting them based on an ACL, that if this thing and that thing match, then you will get this policy applied to your session. So from a troubleshooting perspective, right, how do you troubleshoot DAP type issues? So the good thing is there is just one debug that will pretty much tell you in black and white what the issue is and what exactly the ASA is doing, and that debug is debug DAP trace. So once you enable debug DAP trace, it will show you what the endpoint posture is, right? So what is it running XP? What type of service pack it's running? Is it running any specific antivirus products, whether it's true or false? And then once it has gone through all the attribute checks, it tells you which DAP policy it has selected, right? So in this case, it has selected McAfee 7 SpyBot as the policy. And if this is the policy you expect the user to be able to get, then that's great. But if it shows you that no, the ASA has applied a different policy, and that's why they're either getting a different access or either they're not getting any access, then you can certainly try to see why it's failing the specific McAfee policy. So I want to stop here from a presentation perspective for a few minutes so that I can quickly go through a demo and show you how we can configure the ASA for a clientless connection, and as well as how we can use some of the debugs that we just went through from a troubleshooting perspective. So I'm just trying to log into a box, and I'll share that in a second. Okay. Assuming that you're able to see what I'm sharing right now, it's a remote desktop session that I'm logged into a box. And I'm going to share one other file here. So here's a simple topology where I have an ASA. Behind the ASA, I have a router. And behind the router, I have a subnet 192.168.2.0. My goal is to be able to connect from this PC all the way to the ASA over the clientless SSL VPN tunnel. And then once I'm authenticated and my session established, and be able to access the servers in the backend network. So very simple topology. The ASA's IP address is 209.165.2.1.1 on the public side. So here's the ASA that I'm using. From a configuration perspective, like I said, I'll go through the wizard because we want to quickly set it up for a connection. Say the name is clientless. I want to terminate on the outside. I'm not using any public certificates, so it's going to use its own self-signed certificate for connection. And my group URL is clientless. I want to use a radius server, so I'll quickly define the radius server here. Password. So I'm using the radius server that I just defined. My group policy is clientless policy, and that's then one more thing. I need to define a bookmark. I'm gonna say intranet servers, and like I said, I have two servers. So I'll just define bookmarks for those servers. So server 1. It's 192.168.2.101, and then server 2, 192.168.2.102. So I have two bookmarks defined for server 1 and server 2, and then finish. As you can see, from the visit perspective, it was fairly simple, right? Maybe 2 or 3 screens that we had to go through, but from a CLI perspective, the same. Or the equivalent of that looks fairly complicated again, right? So that's why I prefer to use ASTM. So now you can see that the machine is configured. It's set up. So I'm gonna launch a web browser, and then I'm gonna connect to the website 209.165.201.1/clientless, because that's my the group I defined. So pod 1 user is my name and pod 1 pass. And you can see that it's trying to authenticate, but for whatever reason it's failing. So, and it will eventually fail. So in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll enable debug WebVPN 255 to see why it's failing. So now I just enable the debug. Let me try to authenticate again. Pod 1 user is my username, pod 1 pass, my password. Again, here are the debugs. Here you can see that I'm probably going to show you the interesting stuff. So it's saying, here's the stuff. I'm starting the authentication, and then, user, pod 1 user auth error. So there is something related to this on the ASA where it's not able to authenticate the user properly. So like I said, what we'll do is since you're using Radius, let's just enable Radius debugs and see what's happening. So pod 1 user, pod 1 pass. Oops. And here you can see that even the Radius attributes being sent to the Radius server, in the authentication request where it's sending the username, password, and once it's done, okay, there the user auth error. Where is it? And here you go. It's timing out, right? It's the server response timeout where it's trying to talk to the Radius server, and for whatever reason, the Radius server is not responding back. So I'm assuming that when I define my Radius configuration, I either misspelled something or configured a wrong IP address, and that's the case, right? So my IP address is supposed to be 101, and I had 102, right? So let me change it back to 101. Oops, sorry. 101. That's already there. Why is it not changing it here then? Let me do this again. Edit 101. Okay, there you go. Apply. So now I'm changing it to 101. So pod 1 user, pod 1 pass. And there you go. I can access the portal, and I can go to my server 1, which says secure my portal page, or I can go to server 2, which says it's the internet web server. So that means my bookmarks are working, my portal page is working, and my authentication worked as well. So let me log out. Quickly go through a DAP policy. So as you can see, by default, there is no DAP policy. The default DAP policy says, it doesn't matter what happens or what attributes you're using, I'll just, continue your session. That means I'm not going to block anything. But what we want to do is we want to say, hey, let's configure a DAP policy real quick. And we know that we are trying to connect to a group called Clientless. So let's use that. So if the user's connections are getting terminated on this tunnel, and from an endpoint perspective, let's say they're using Android platform, which I know we are not using, and our DAP policy is going to fail. Let's apply an ACL as well so that we can restrict their access. So let me create an ACL called DAP and restrict maybe server 2 from getting access. So I'll say only allow server 1. So only permit server 1 into this list. So let me push the DAP policy. And then if for whatever reason my connection doesn't match this DAP policy, terminate any other sessions. That means don't match it to the default policy either, and then terminate the session. So let's see what happens. So now I am gonna authenticate myself again, pod 1 user, pod 1 pass, and you can see that it denied my access, saying that my environment doesn't match the policy. The existing debugs are not going to help me much because we had authentication specific debugs enabled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable, like I said, WebVPN 255 first because I want to see why it's failing. So if you're a network admin, the end users are not going to say, hey, the DAP policy is failing, so you have to kind of figure it out yourself. So here you can see that user 1 was authenticated. However, the dynamic access policy terminated the connection. So now you know that at least user was fully authenticated, but something else stopped it, and then in this case, it seems like DAP stopped it. So I'm going to disable this debug and enable debug DAP trace because it seems like it is DAP focused. So pod 1 user, pod 1 pass. We know that it's going to fail, and it did. But here you can see that it matched the default policy, right? It didn't match the policy that we configured. And we kind of know that it's the case because, in our policy, we are saying that it matched the endpoint platform and see whether it's Android, and we are not connecting from an Android-based device. So I'm going to remove this check and say if the user are connecting to this clientless group, then apply this WebVPN filter. So let's see if it works. It seems like my Java is not fully configured for whatever reason. So let me just reset it and see if it. Yeah, it's not removing. Huh. Let me change a few things. Oops, sorry. Let me change a few things. Okay, maybe it did apply it then. Okay, let me just check and see if it works. Pod 1 user, pod 1 pass. Oh, there you go, it worked. And you can see that if I go back to my debugs, that the selected DAP policy is clientless -DAP, which is what we expected. And since it selected our configured DAP policy, it is blocking server 2 access, right? So access denied. However, I can go to server 1 just fine. It's just that I'm not going to be able to go to server 2. So that concludes our demo for clientless connection. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. And get into the AnyConnect SSL VPN discussions. So before we get into that, the third polling question is, what role do you play when you design and deploy a solution, including an SSL VPN in your organization, right? Are you responsible for architecting and designing the solution? So are you in more of a solution architect role, or are you more in an implementation and deployment type role where someone designed it, now you're implementing it? Or are you from a day 2 perspective, more responsible from supporting the users from a troubleshooting and maintenance of the solution? It's possible that you might fit into all those roles. So option D kind of covers that, or option E is, if you're in a different type of role. So please select your option, and while you're doing that, let me continue on. So from a configuration perspective, I'll kind of follow the similar methodology where, I'll show you from a wizard perspective how the SSL VPN portion of AnyConnect is going to be configured, and then show you some troubleshooting options, how we can troubleshoot specific SSL VPN options. So from a wizard, launch the VPN wizard, select AnyConnect. From there, click Next. Specify a connection profile name. In this case, in the clientless option, we use clientless But here, if you're using My Connection Profile, we want to terminate the connections on the outside interface. It allows you, because AnyConnect supports both SSL VPN and IPsec version 2 or IKE version 2. So you can use whatever protocols for AnyConnect. So since we are focusing on SSL VPN, we're going to select SSL and deselect the IPsec option. And if you're using any specific certificates, you can certainly select that certificate from here. After that, like I mentioned earlier, you can push down AnyConnect client from the ASA to the end host if they're not configured for an SSL for the AnyConnect client. So you can select whatever the package name or whatever version of AnyConnect client you want to push down. Again, specify the authentication database. And then, since in the AnyConnect client you want to know, you want to assign an IP address to the client, right? So you have to specify a pool of addresses where, when the tunnel is being negotiated, the ASA assigns the next free available IP address to the VPN client. So you can specify a pool of addresses, and then specify any DNS or WIN server. And in case you're doing address translation on the ASAs, in some cases you might be using your ASA as a firewall. You don't really want to change the addresses for the traffic going over the VPN connection. So you really want to exclude doing address translation for the VPN session. So click Next, and then it shows you the configuration again from the CLI perspective, and then it pushes the configuration to the ASA. Once it's configured, you can even see that it's configured under the AnyConnect connection profile, and whatever profile name we created earlier, My Connection Profile, it's there, terminating the SSL VPN connections. From the endpoint perspective, once the users are authenticated and connected, you can look at the stats on the AnyConnect client as well. Whether the traffic is being encrypted or decrypted, or what type of address, what address you got, and what type of encryption you're using, and any of the other mechanisms or options that if they were even pushed down to you or not. You can even look at the message history. It kind of tells you at a high level what the VPN client was doing, and if there are issues from a client perspective, maybe it wasn't able to resolve the IP or to resolve the host name of the head end, or it timed out by connecting to the head end, but it's not trying to connect to the backup server, or whatever the client-based connectivity type of options or messages are. They will all be shown under the message history option or tab of the client. Again, from a troubleshooting perspective, how can you troubleshoot AnyConnect type options? In a form of a few scenarios, right? What if users are calling the support line and saying, hey, my VPN access is not working. Again, they're not going to say, yeah, my VPN access is not working because you have configured a specific DAP policy and that policy is failing, right? They're not going to be very specific. They're going to be very generic. Hey, I'm trying to connect from my home machine and it's not working. Or I'm in a hotel room. It worked fine when I was in the office. Now it's not working anymore, right? And you kind of have to troubleshoot why it's not working, or what the issue is. From a debug and show command perspective, right? We'll go through some of the debugs shortly, but from a command perspective, from a show command perspective, show VPN session DB AnyConnect filter, and then IP address is useful if people are authenticated, but they're not able to pass traffic, and you can look at some of the statistics around it. But from a debug perspective, debug WebVPN AnyConnect is fairly useful. If you narrow it down to an authentication problem, you can also enable debug AAA common. So again, in this case, let me show you a good debug. Good debug says, the host is connecting from this. It's running VPN client, 3.0, 0629 version. We're waiting to have an address assigned, and this is the address that we assign, and after that, the session was connected. However, from a bad, authentication perspective, you can see that, let's say if you enable debug AAA common command, and you know that the problem is related to authentication. You can look at the debugs and see that, in this case, again, the server response time server was configured for this address, but it needed to be configured for some other address. Or you're going to see issues where people are authenticated, they are connected, but they are not able to pass traffic. All they're going to say is, again, I'm connected, but I cannot go to my internal website, or I want to try to connect to my RDP session when it's not working. So how can you do that? So from a connection, from a client statistics perspective, or you can see that, seems like the VPN client is sending a lot of traffic, right? So it sent, 36,000 bytes of traffic, but it's, for whatever reason, it's not receiving anything back from the head end. And you can look at, similar statistics from the ASA as well, or on the ASA as well. So what can cause something like this, where the traffic is being sent from the client, chances are the traffic is being received on the ASA, but the ASA is not encrypting anything back to the client? There could be many different reasons. The first reason could be, the traffic might be getting to the ASA. ASA is decrypting it, sending it to wherever the traffic needed to go, right? Let's say the corporate network. And the corporate network is responding back, but the router along the path didn't know where the pool of addresses was. So you define a pool of addresses on the ASA, but you forgot to redistribute that pool of addresses into the corporate network. So the traffic is just being dropped on the router because it doesn't know where to route the 10.10.20.0 subnet to. So you may have to add a route on the router so that it points this subnet to the ASA, and so that ASA then gets the return traffic and then be able to encrypt it back to the client. Or there could be other reasons, right? You may have an ACL configured on the ASA where, ASA is sending the traffic to the corporate network, but when the traffic is getting to the ASA, there is an ACL that's dropping the traffic coming in, and that's the reason why the ASA is not encrypting it back. Or you don't really run into this issue unless you really disable this command manually. So by default, anything that's encrypted and it's being received on the ASA is not subject to any ACL check. So, when the traffic is received on the SSL VPN connection, ASA decrypts it, and then even if you have ACLs configured on the outside interface or whatever interface, the ASA doesn't resend the traffic to the interface ACL for check by default. Unless you disable this option, SysOpt connection permit VPN option, and say that no, even when the traffic is decrypted, send the traffic to the interface ACL for check to see whether the decrypted traffic is even allowed or not. Again, in that case, the VPN client will be encrypting it. The ASA will be decrypting it, and after decryption, it will send the traffic to the interface ACL. And if there is some issue or problem with the interface ACL where it's not allowing the decrypted traffic to be passed through, then the traffic is going to get dropped, and even the end host, the corporate network, is not going to be able to receive any traffic from that perspective. Let me go to the next option. On the client, again, if you're not able, if you went through your troubleshooting process and you're not able to figure out why the AnyConnect client is able to connect, or why the AnyConnect client is having issues from from any perspective, from installation perspective, from enabling the virtual adapter perspective. There is a feature within the AnyConnect called DART. Stands for AnyConnect Diagnostics and Reporting Tool. You can collect the DART information, and it's very detailed information, and I'll try to go through that in the demo as well. And then, so how do you enable it? So if you go to the statistics option, you should see an option for diagnostics. If you click on that, it will ask you whether you want to select the default option. That means whatever are the default options, it will bundle it into a zip file and then give it to you. Or you can select specific fields to see whether you want to just zip up the installation type issues or connectivity type issues or whatever type of issue. So you can customize your installation. You can customize your package from that perspective. It takes a few minutes for it to zip up. Again, it's because it's collecting a lot of information. And at the end, it shows you the zip file again from a detail analysis perspective. Even if you look at the summary file, it shows you all the possible things or subfiles or subfolders it has created, and shows you all the logs files that it has collected. We don't expect you to be able to go through all these files, but if your issue is really complicated and you're not able to figure it out, chances are you have to package it and then send it to Cisco TAC so that they can then analyze it in greater detail. And a lot of these options, a lot of our logs in the file are supposed to be reviewed by the tech engineer along with the BU support. So chances are we may have to send it to the BU so that they can even analyze it further. Again, I'm assuming that your issue is very complicated where you have to get to that level of details. And that concludes the presentation part. I just have to do another quick demo from an AnyConnect perspective, and after that, pretty much we're done. The useful references I've showed is, you can go to the Cisco's ASA website. It has very useful documentation, sample configurations. You can download software, or you can even go to Cisco Support Community, right, if you have any questions. If you're running into something and you want to ask, the experts on the community, you can certainly do that. And as Dan mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have written a number of books as well, and they kind of go through all these type of things, right? Configuration, different options, and then troubleshooting and deployment type of scenarios as well. So let me go through the AnyConnect demo real quick, and after that we can open it up for Q&A. So let me share my desktop again. Okay. On the ASA, let me just disable all the debugs. Just refresh just to make sure that my connection is still active. And we'll do something similar that we did with the clientless option, where I'll go through the wizard real quick, configure the AnyConnect part. So wizard, next, I'm going to call it AnyConnect. I want to terminate on the outside interface. I don't want to enable SSL VPN. I don't want to enable IPsec VPN. Let me select the image I want to push down to the user in case they don't have the AnyConnect client. And I think from a clientless perspective, I already have a radius server defined. So I'm going to use the same radius server. I don't have a pool of addresses. Let me define a pool of addresses here. Next, let me quickly define my DNS server and my Win server. And that's it. Even though I'm not using a NAT, I'll just exempt it from from address translation, and you can see that from a configuration perspective, it's not simple. And let me quickly show you the topology I have for AnyConnect. So again, similar setup. I have an AS8. I want this client to establish an AnyConnect tunnel, and once authenticated, be able to access the internal network. The pool of addresses is 10.10.1.0/24. Pretty much everything is fairly similar. So now that I have a VPN connection enabled, let me go to a client machine. So I'm remote desktop into another machine that I'm going to use for client purposes. And actually, I already have a VPN client installed because I want to save time. So I'm going to connect from this VPN client and see what happens. Ready to connect, connecting to the ASA. And in a second, you're probably going to see a certificate warning because, again, I'm using a self-signed certificate. Yep, there it is. I connect anyways. Saying, okay, give me your user credential. I'm going to say password. And it says login denied, that your environment doesn't meet the access criteria. If you remember it, we got something similar when we were testing out the clientless option, and that was because we had a DAP policy configured. So if you remember, we still have a DAP policy active that says for clientless connections, allow it and apply a web filter, but for anything else, terminate the connection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another DAP policy that allows my AnyConnect session to be successfully terminated. I'm going to say if people are connecting to this profile AnyConnect, then continue their session so that the DAP policy does not block them at all. So I'm going to go back to my client machine. I'm going to say connect again. It's going to give me the certificate warning again, which I'll accept. And then after that, it will prompt me for credentials. Connect. Part 1 pass. Part 1 pass. Oh, okay, it's failing my credentials. So if we go back to the ASA, debug WebVPN 255. Let's see why it's failing it. Part 1 pass. Actually, let me enable debug AAA common SL and debug radius SL. Strange, I'm not getting any messages. So I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the DAP policy one more time. Connect, continue. Actually, let me just delete that real quick because I know we are running out of time. So continue and apply. Machine. Let's connect it again. Oh, that's probably because I know what the problem is. Because in the wizard, that's one of the issues. In the wizard, it doesn't show you how you can apply a policy. So we are, in a way, just directly connecting to the we're just directly connecting to the base policy. We're not connecting to the specific AnyConnect policy. So let me just, and I know I'm going to run into another issue because I'm remote desktop into this client machine, and by default the policy does not allow it. So I'm going to enable remote VPN establishment to say even allow it from remote users, and then push it out real quick. And since I only got 50 more minutes left, I need to finish this demo real quick so that we can open it up for Q&A, and then Dan can close out the remainder part of the presentation. So part 1 pass. Yeah, so it's probably, I have to probably go to the, yeah, so it's probably not going to the group policy that we configured. And that's probably because I installed the VPN client manually. I didn't download it from the web deployment, and probably that's why it's not connecting to this specific group policy that I have configured. Yeah, it's not going to match. So what I'll do is I'll stop the demo here. One other thing I wanted to show is in the diagnostics, right? So if you want to collect DAP policy, so the DART policy, you can just click Next and select whether you want to use the default DAP policy or the custom DAP policy. And once you start the collection process, it will take, depending on the platform and depending on how fast your computer is, it's probably going to take a few minutes. And after that, it will show you the zip file with all the attributes. So let me go back to the presentation real quick so that we have enough time for the Q&A. So Dan, do you want to open it up for Q&A or
yeah, sure. Thank you. We can move into the Q&A portion today for sure. Okay. Let's start things off with our first question. With double authentication, we end up with 2 fields on the AnyConnect client called password. Can we customize this to token or passcode if we are not using SDI, but rather another radius-based authentication method?
No, that's a good question. So the reason why we enabled double authentication was because, a lot of customers wanted to use, 2-factor type authentication, such as, radius or such as SDI or token-based authentication, and then an internal authentication database such as Active Directory. And that's why I think when we coded it, we assumed that, you are going to be using SDI, and that's why you see the option for token or passcode. So I don't think in the current version there is an option to do that. But that's something, that's a good point. Whether if you're using, for example, Active Directory or Radius as your 2 authentication databases, and you don't want to, see token or passcode written on it, I think we can probably work with the BU for an enhancement that we can then work and get it done. But no, so the answer is no, not at the moment.
Okay, good. Sounds like a good question. Let's move to our next question here. May I have reference info for the different debug levels? For example, debug WebVPN, and then the number associated. It looks like this user is looking for a little bit more detail on where to find
the
info on the debugs.
Some of the debugs are fairly well defined, even from a different level perspective. But a lot of debugs, to be honest with you, are not as defined from each level perspective. What are the messages you are supposed to get, or what are the messages you expect at each level? So again, depending on what debug you're using, I would say a general safe option, because if you enable debug to 51, and what if that debug to 55 is showing you, the decoded packet, and you expect that you may just crash your system because you may get so much debug at a packet level that you're not going to be able to sustain. I would say the safest option is probably around 127. Once you have debug 127 enabled, it shows you enough messages, enough details to be able to then take it to the next level, right? If it says that, hey, you're failing because of this, and you're still not sure, then you can increase the debugs. But I wouldn't recommend that you enable debug to 255 unless you know what you're expecting. And if you don't know what output you may get, just start off at level 127.
Okay, good info. Let's go to our next question. Where are bookmarks saved in the ASA?
Bookmarks. The bookmarks are saved in the, let me see, I'm trying to remember, because it has been a while since I looked at that. A lot of information from a SSL VPN perspective level is stored in the XML file. I'm trying to remember whether bookmarks are saved in that XML or it's saved in the actual configuration. I think I want to say it's saved in the actual configuration. And we can quickly look at that when we pushed out a bookmark to the, actually it's probably in the slide as well. Let me look at the slide real quick. But yeah, it's a very good question. It's just that I have played with SSL VPN so much that I just haven't really paid much attention in terms of where exactly it's storing the bookmark. So yeah, so here you can see that we are defining the policy, the bookmarks. Yeah, so you're defining the value here, right? So internet sites. And if it's not in the configuration, then it's storing it into an XML file on the local flash.
Okay. Let's go to our next question here. Can the clientless SSL be used for RDP?
Yes, it can. You have to install a plugin, actually, a server-side plugin. So on the Cisco's website, you can download 3 types of plugins: plugin for RDP, plugin for VNC, and plugin for SSH and Telnet. So once you install those plugins into the ASA, you can then use even RDP for within clientless SSL. And you can even define bookmarks. You can say, hey, here's a bookmark for RDP. If you just click on this link, once you're authenticated, it will connect your session via the RDP session. And the other thing is, if you are not using the plugins and if you just want to tunnel the traffic, remember you talked about the thin client option with smart tunnels and port forwarding. So you can even use smart tunnels as a part of that and tunnel your traffic, tunnel your RDP traffic through it. So you have 2 options in a way if you want to tunnel RDP traffic within clientless connections.
Okay, excellent. And we are running short on time, so I think we have time for just one more question. Do we support IPv6 traffic over the SSL VPN tunnel?
Good question. So at the moment, you can certainly send IPv6 traffic over the SSL tunnel. However, the restriction is that it also terminates the V4 tunnel. So in a way, it's encapsulating V6 traffic over a V4 tunnel, and then so you're still authenticating to the head end, and you're still being pushed down a V4 address, but you're also pushed down a V6 address. So your VPN client is in a way encapsulating V6 traffic within V4 and then tunneling it all the way to the ASA where it's then decanculating. But from an end-to-end V6 connectivity perspective, you should be able to communicate. Yes.
Okay, very good. That's going to conclude our Q&A portion of today's event. Now we're gonna finish up here with just some quick updated slides, and of course we want to finish up our trivia question. I apologize. I think I did read the wrong trivia question in the beginning. So let me read today's question. In the year 2005, what did Harry Potter, Cisco Adaptive Security Appliance, and YouTube have in common? You can take a moment if you want to try to guess. Just give it a minute here. And the correct answer, I believe, is C. The second Harry Potter film was released. Jazib releases his second edition of his book, which just came very close to outselling the Harry Potter book. And Google acquires YouTube. Okay, so and of course we do appreciate your feedback here, and we encourage you to fill out the evaluation that will pop once you close the WebEx window. Everyone who does fill out the survey will be entered to win a $50 Amazon gift card. We do value your feedback, so please take a moment to fill out the survey. It's very short and to the point, and we'd like to hear from you. Of course, as always, Jazib will be answering questions in the Cisco Support Community Forum for the next 2 weeks. So you can just head over to supportforums.cisco.com and just look for the link with today's event title. And Jazib will be answering questions from October 30th through November 9th. So you can follow up or get a little bit more detail on some of the topics that we covered today. This video will be available along with the question and answer within the next 5 business days as well inside the Cisco Support Community. So you can recap it if you joined late. Some of the upcoming webcasts that we have in November. This will be an English webcast. The topic will be troubleshooting Cisco Unified Communication Manager integration with Cisco Telepresence Video Communication Server. That will take place on November 28th at 7 a.m. Pacific Time, 10 a.m. New York Time, 4 p.m. Paris time. Following that, we have a Russian webcast. This will be on November 1st at 12 p.m. Moscow time, 10 a.m. Brussels time. The topic will be Cisco Nexus 5000 and 2000 Architecture and Features Overview. We have a Japanese webcast coming up in November. That's on Tuesday, November 6th. Cisco Catalyst Series Spanning Tree Protocol Troubleshooting Training. We have another Spanish webcast coming up. That'll be on November 13th. The topic will be Video Communication Server, Cisco Unified Communication Manager, Integration through Session Initiation Protocol Trunk. And we do have a few Expert Series events running right now on the site. Troubleshooting memory and other issues on the Cisco ISR, ISR G2, and 7200. We also have RF Matters in Mobility Design with Flavia and Richard. And we have a few upcoming events, both in English. Topics are concepts for Smart Call Home. And we have a second one. Topic is configuring and troubleshooting faxing in Cisco IP voice networks. As you can see, we have many different communities across many different languages. So please do check around the site for languages in your local language for events. You can always suggest new ones, as we're always looking to hear back from our audience. You can also join the multiple social networks that Cisco Support Community is a part of. If you haven't checked us out, please do so. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and just about every other social network that you can find. So please do check it out. And it looks like we have our answers here for the trivia question. And I'm looking to see which one was that. If I was right that it was C.
It's actually, I think, option A, I think, Dan.
Oh, it was A. Well, that serves me right for guessing with C. So the correct answer was A, in fact. In 2005, the book did hit the bestsellers list. Cisco released the ASA 5500 series in May of 2005, and YouTube was launched in 2005. Growing very rapidly, reaching 100 million views per day within a year of being launched. Very impressive. Okay, that's going to wrap up our webcast for today. I want to thank Jazib for an excellent presentation and demo today, as well as thank you to all our experts who are behind the scenes are answering questions from our audience. And a big thank you, of course, to everyone who joined today. We'll see you next time, and have a great day.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.